Last summer I pulled 47 pounds of peppers off 4 plants in a 4x8 raised bed. 4 plants. 47 pounds. The year before, same bed, same seeds, same sun, I pulled maybe 12. The only thing that changed was 1 cup of something I had been ignoring in the back of my pantry since the day I moved into this house. Gloria mentioned it offhand on her balcony in San Francisco. Said her family had used it on chilies for 60 years, and that the American fertilizer companies had spent decades training home gardeners to forget about it, because there is no profit margin in something that costs about 4 cents a serving. Stick around, because at the end, I will tell you the one common mistake that turns this from a harvest doubler into a plant killer. Here's the thing, the reason that 1 cup of pantry powder is not in your gardening books is not an accident. It got walked out of the literature on purpose by a specific industry in a specific window of time, and I can name the years for you. In 1947, the American chemical industry had a problem. The war was over. The munitions plants that had been cranking out ammonium nitrate for bombs had nothing to make. So those plants got converted. Same nitrogen, same equipment, new label, home garden fertilizer. Suddenly, there was a national supply of synthetic plant food looking for a national demand. In 1951, Miracle-Gro launched and built that demand into a household name. In 1955, the major manufacturers formed the Fertilizer Institute as their lobbying arm in Washington. And within about 15 years, the USDA extension pamphlets that used to mention kitchen pantry amendments, milk, eggshells, ash, bone, quietly stopped mentioning them. By the mid-1960s, if you wrote to your county extension office and asked how to feed your peppers, you got a leaflet that recommended a bagged product with a guaranteed analysis label. You did not get your grandmother's answer. The reason is not complicated. A pantry powder cannot be bagged, branded, patented, or sold at margin. So, it got dropped. And here is what home gardeners specifically lost. Roughly 60% lower pepper yields than what the plant is actually capable of year after year, because the one mineral peppers need most during fruit set is the one most backyard soils are quietly short on. Plus, the cost of walking into a garden center every June and paying about $14 a bottle for a calcium deficiency spray to fix blossom end rot. A problem that 4 cents of pantry powder would have prevented in the first place. I want to be honest with you, I did this the wrong way for almost 10 years. I bought the bottled tomato and pepper feed. I bought the calcium spray. I stood in the aisle at Home Depot reading the labels. And the answer was sitting 3 feet from my coffee maker the whole time. So let me name it for you, because the whole point of this video is that you should not have to wait for the reveal. The pantry staple is non-fat dry milk powder, plain powdered milk. The boxed kind in the baking aisle, the kind your grandmother probably had on a shelf, the kind that shows up in emergency kits and church food drives, and the back corners of pantries where nobody touches it, because nobody drinks reconstituted milk anymore. 1 cup of non-fat dry milk powder, fully dissolved in 1 gallon of room temperature water, poured at the base of a pepper plant once every 3 to 4 weeks during fruiting. That is the entire trick. That is the 4 cents a serving secret. And the first time I heard it, I almost laughed because I had a box of it sitting in my own pantry from a power outage emergency kit I'd put together 2 winters earlier and completely forgotten about. Here is how I learned. About 2 years ago, I was up in San Francisco visiting Gloria. Gloria Chen, my old upstairs neighbor from when I lived in the city, retired 4th grade teacher, the woman who taught me most of what I actually know about growing food in small spaces. Her balcony in the sunset is maybe 8 feet by 4 feet, and on it, she grows tomatoes, basil, ginger in its 3rd year, bok choy, and a row of Taiwanese bird's-eye chilies in 5-gallon buckets that produce more peppers than you would believe. I was standing there watching her cook dinner, and she walks out onto the balcony with a plastic watering can, scoops a heaping cup of white powder into it from a tin she keeps right next to the chili pots, fills it with water from the tap, swirls it around, and starts watering. I asked her what she was doing. She did not even pause. She said, "My grandmother kept a tin of milk powder next to the chili pots in Taiwan for 60 years. During the wet season, she watered them with the milky water. The chilies want bones. We don't have bones, so we give them milk." That sentence stopped me. The chilies want bones. We don't have bones, so we give them milk. I have been turning that line over in my head ever since, because it is the entire principle in 14 words, and there is not a fertilizer label in America that explains it that clearly. I went home to Sacramento that night, walked into my pantry, pulled out the box of powdered milk I had been ignoring since the day I moved into this house, and read the label, calcium content per tablespoon, right there on the side of the box. And that is exactly the kind of thing that doesn't make it into the glossy seed company guides, because nobody can sell you a tin of milk powder with a green leaf logo on it and a 30% markup. Now here's why it works. And this is the part that took me a while to fully understand, because the mechanism is not just one thing. It is 3 things stacked on top of each other in a single cup of pantry powder. The first thing is calcium, and this is the headline. Peppers are heavy calcium feeders. Pound for pound, a fruiting pepper plant pulls more calcium out of the soil than a tomato plant does, which is something most home gardeners have no idea about, because the bagged fertilizer world treats peppers and tomatoes like the same crop. They are not. Pepper fruit is built almost entirely out of calcium-reinforced cell walls, and when calcium gets short during fruit set, the plant does what plants always do under stress. It aborts. The little pinhead-sized fruit at the back of the flower drops off before it ever gets going. You walk out one morning and there are tiny green dots all over the soil under your plants, and you wonder what went wrong. What went wrong is calcium. Most backyard soil tests low in plant-available calcium during fruit set, even in soil that looks great on paper. The total calcium might be there, but plant-available calcium, the kind the roots can actually pull up, gets locked up by pH, by phosphorus competition, by dry spells, by a dozen things. Bagged amendments like bone meal release calcium so slowly that by the time it shows up in the fruiting window has already closed. Powdered milk does not have that problem. A single tablespoon of non-fat dry milk delivers roughly 300 milligrams of calcium in a form that is essentially pre-digested for plants. Dissolved in water, it goes into the soil already in solution, and the roots take it up within days. 1 cup of milk powder, dissolved in 1 gallon of water, poured at the drip line. That is enough bioavailable calcium for 1 mature pepper plant for about 3 weeks of active fruiting. But the calcium is only the first thing. The second thing is the casein. Casein is the protein in milk, and when it hits warm soil, the microbe community goes to work on it like it is the best meal they have had all month. They break the casein down into amino acids, and the amino acids break down into a slow, steady release of nitrogen, what I think of as a microbial nitrogen drip. It is not a hit of nitrate that pushes a wave of leafy growth and then crashes. It is a low, even 3-week feed that supports the plant exactly through the fruiting window. And the third thing, almost a bonus on top of the bonus, is the trace phosphorus and the B vitamins that come along for the ride. Small amounts, but real amounts. And B vitamins in particular have been shown to support root development and stress tolerance in fruiting plants. So what you actually have in 1 cup of dry milk powder dissolved in a gallon of water is a calcium correction, a slow-release nitrogen feed, and a trace mineral input, all in 1 application, all from a 4-cent serving of Pantry shelf-stable powder. Now think about what that means from the angle of somebody trying to sell you a fertilizer. You cannot bag this and brand it. You cannot give it a guaranteed analysis label because the calcium to protein to trace mineral ratio shifts a little from box to box. Calcium chloride and calcium nitrate were cheaper to standardize, easier to put in a plastic jug, easier to slap a number on, and they showed up on the shelves in the late 1950s and early 1960s, right when the Pantry Amendment recommendations quietly started disappearing from the Extension Service literature. That is not an accident. That is a market shift. And here is what that market shift cost the home gardener, including me, for about 10 years longer than it should have. So let me get into the actual recipe, because the protocol matters more than the science, and the protocol is where most people who hear about this trick still end up getting it wrong. Here's exactly what I do, and what I have done in the same 4x8 raised bed for the last 3 seasons. 1 cup of non-fat dry milk powder, 1 gallon of room temperature water. Not hot. Hot water denatures the casein, and the proteins clump up into ropes that won't dissolve. Not cold either. Cold water leaves grit at the bottom of the can, and you end up pouring half of it down the drain when you rinse the watering can out. Room temperature. Tap water is fine. I stir it with a long wooden spoon for about a minute until the mixture is opaque and uniform, and there are no white flecks floating on top. It looks like thin skim milk because, well, it basically is thin skim milk. Then I take that gallon and I pour it slowly at the drip line of each plant, meaning the circle on the soil directly below where the outer leaves end. Not on the stem, not on the leaves, not at the base of the trunk. The drip line where the feeder roots actually live. 1 gallon covers 4 pepper plants in my bed comfortably, which works out to about a quart per plant. I do this 3 times across the season, June 1st, July 1st, and August 1st here in Sacramento Zone 9B. If you're in a colder zone, the rule is simpler. First application about 2 weeks after you see the first flowers set on the plant, then every 3 to 4 weeks until you're 3 weeks out from your first frost date. That's it. 3 applications, no follow-up sprays, no bagged fertilizer rotation, no expensive blossom and rot treatments, just the milk drench. And here's what happened in my bed, which I weighed on the kitchen scale because I weigh every harvest for my own records. Year 1, no milk drench, 4 pepper plants in that 4x8 bed, 12 pounds of peppers across the whole season. Year 2, same bed, same seed saved from year 1, same amount of sun, same compost. Only difference, 3 milk drenches, 47 pounds. The plants looked different too. They were sturdier. The fruit set was thicker. Instead of half the flowers turning into a tiny pinhead and then dropping off the plant a week later, fewer than 10% of the flowers aborted. The peppers themselves were bigger by maybe 30% on individual fruit weight. And the plants kept producing about 3 weeks longer into the fall before the cooling soil finally shut them down. And that's the whole thing. 4 cents a serving, 3 applications, no patent on it, no shelf at Home Depot, no glossy bag with a guaranteed analysis label, and somehow it doesn't appear in any of the seed company growing guides I've collected off the rack at the garden center over the last decade. Now, if you've been doing this a few years and you've heard about the milk powder trick before, there are 2 things that even the people who know about it usually miss, and I want you to hear me out on both because they explain why this technique gets a mixed reputation in the rare gardening forums where it does come up. The first one is soil temperature. Powdered milk does not work in cold soil. The reason is that the casein proteins in the milk only break down into plant-available nitrogen when the soil microbes that digest casein are awake and active. And those microbes need soil temperatures above 60 degrees Fahrenheit to do meaningful work. If you pour a milk drench on cold spring soil, say 52 degrees in early April, the casein just sits there. Within a few days it starts to mold, the lactose starts to ferment, and instead of feeding your plants, you fed a fungal bloom in the top inch of your bed. That is why you wait until 2 weeks after first flower set, every time. By the time the plant is flowering, your soil is warm enough. Most folks who tried this trick once and said it didn't work were applying it in April when nothing in their bed was ready for it yet. The second thing is what other plants this works on, because peppers are not the only crop that responds. Chilies, obviously. Same plant family, same hunger for calcium during fruit set. And that's exactly what Gloria's grandmother in Taiwan was using it on 60 years ago. Eggplant responds beautifully too, with the same mechanism. Heavy calcium feeder, fruit wall integrity matters. Tomatoes do respond, but the effect is smaller because tomato cell walls handle calcium a little differently than pepper cell walls do, and they have other ways of grabbing it from the soil. You'll see less fruit drop on tomatoes, but you won't see the dramatic doubling I saw with peppers. And here's the surprise. Gloria uses this on her bok choy and her cabbage, and I tried it on a fall planting of bok choy 2 years ago, and the heads were nearly twice the size of the unsupplemented row. Calcium-loving leafy crops respond, even though we don't usually think about leafy crops as calcium feeders. What this does not work on, and I want to be clear about this, do not pour milk drench on blueberries, potatoes, or strawberries. Those are acid-loving plants, and the calcium and the microbial activity will swing the soil pH in a direction that hurts them. Same goes for rhododendrons or anything in that pH range, which I know isn't a vegetable, but I've had viewers ask. So peppers, chilies, eggplant, tomatoes, cabbage, bok choy, yes. Acid-loving crops, no. A calcium correction, a microbial nitrogen drip, and a trace mineral feed in one pantry box, and somehow this fell out of every gardening book printed after 1962. Now, if what I just walked you through is starting to make sense, and you're realizing that you've been buying back what was free this whole time, I want to point you at the full system, because the milk drench is one piece of a much larger pattern. I put together a 172-page guide called The 30-Day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol, and it's $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. The chapter that lines up directly with what I just showed you is Chapter 4, Container Gardening on Zero Budget, which walks through free and nearly free soil amendments alongside my $3 bag of grocery store potatoes that turned into 100 pounds of food in fabric grow bags. Same pantry and recycling bin mindset applied across the whole growing system with 3 line art diagrams showing the container setups, the drainage layouts, and the hilling stages. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point the camera at the QR code on the screen. It'll take you straight there. If you're on your phone or your laptop, the link is in the description right below this video. Take a second now, no rush. I'll be right here when you get back. All right. So now we have to talk about why this got buried in the first place, because the technique is too simple and too effective for it to have just slipped through the cracks. It didn't slip. It was pushed. The American home garden fertilizer segment is roughly a $2 billion a year business. That's not the agricultural fertilizer market, which is much larger. That's just the consumer side, the bags and bottles you see on the shelf at the garden center. Every single pantry shelf solution that works is a direct hit to that $2 billion. A cup of powdered milk costs about 4 cents per application. A bottle of commercial calcium deficiency spray for blossom and rot runs anywhere from 50 cents to $1.20 per application, depending on the brand. Multiply that across millions of home gardeners across decades, and you start to see why a free pantry solution is not something the industry would ever choose to amplify. That alone is enough motive, but it's not the whole story. There's a second piece that has to do with the extension services. Starting in the 1960s, the cooperative extension offices that put out the gardening pamphlets shifted toward amendments with guaranteed analysis labels, 824 NPK, 10-10-10, that kind of thing. Numbers on a bag. The reason is regulatory. Standardized amendments can be regulated, taxed, recommended at scale, and tested in field trials with consistent inputs. Variable kitchen ingredients, like a cup of powdered milk that comes in slightly different formulations from one box to the next, don't fit that model, even when they outperform the bagged products in actual home garden conditions. So, the recommendation literature got cleaned up. Anything that didn't have a guaranteed analysis label got dropped, and a lot of grandmother-level practical knowledge went out the side door at the same time. And that is the third piece I want to name briefly, because it's uncomfortable, but it's true. A lot of the techniques carried by Taiwanese, Mexican, Italian, and Eastern European home gardeners in this country were dismissed as folklore in the official gardening literature, even when they outperformed the bagged products. Gloria's family was using milk powder on chilies before any of those bagged calcium sprays existed. The knowledge wasn't missing. It was just labeled the wrong way to make it onto an extension service mimeograph. Now, I do want to acknowledge the obvious counterargument here, because forbidden audiences see right through scripts that don't. Powdered milk is not a complete fertilizer. It will not replace nitrogen-heavy feeding for leafy crops like corn or heavy lettuce production. It will not fix every garden problem. The suppression isn't about it being a magic bullet. It's about it being a free calcium delivery the industry could not monetize, and it got quietly walked out of the literature for that reason. So here's the personal piece. I added up what I spent on bottled tomato and pepper feed across the years. I didn't know about this. Roughly $14 a bottle, 2 to 3 bottles a season, across about 10 seasons before Gloria sat me down on her balcony with a watering can. That's about $1,400 I handed over to the garden center for something a 4-cent pantry serving would have done better. So I'll ask you the same question I had to ask myself, and I want you to actually sit with it for a second. How much have you spent buying back what your grandmother already had on her shelf? Now, I told you at the top I'd come back to the one mistake that turns this from a harvest doubler into a plant killer. And I have to be honest with you about it because I'm the one who made it. In 2022, my second season trying this, I got lazy. I had the box of powdered milk on the counter, I had a pepper bed that needed feeding, and I thought, why bother dissolving it? Why dirty a watering can? I just sprinkled the dry powder in a ring around the base of each plant, watered it in with the hose, and walked away feeling clever. Within a week, 2 of those plants were yellowing from the bottom up. Within 10 days, they were done. I killed them. Here's what was actually happening down there. 3 things, all bad, all at once. First, the lactose in the powder ferments in warm soil, and the casein molds within about 48 hours. And that mold is a dinner bell. Fungus gnats show up, ants show up, and in my case, a couple of rats that had never bothered the bed before came sniffing around the root zone. Second, the soil microbes that try to digest that concentrated protein burn through the available nitrogen reserves to do it, which means a sudden temporary nitrogen tie-up right in the root zone. The leaves yellow from the bottom, fruit set stalls, and the plant looks like it's starving even though you just fed it. And third, the dry powder bakes into a crust on the soil surface that is genuinely hydrophobic. Water beads up and runs off instead of soaking in. The plant gets thirsty under a lid you can't see. I called Gloria, embarrassed, and she gave me the rule I should have started with the first time. 1 cup of non-fat dry milk powder, 1 gallon of room temperature water. Not hot, because hot water denatures the proteins and ruins the slow release effect, and not cold, because cold water won't fully dissolve the powder. Stir until there are no clumps. Pour slowly at the drip line, never on the leaves, never on the stem. Once every 3 to 4 weeks during fruiting, and never during dormancy. That's the whole rule. The few gardening forums where this trick surfaces, most of the people complaining about it are doing the dry sprinkle version, which is exactly why it has the bad reputation it does, and which is exactly why this knowledge keeps surfacing and getting buried again, while the $14 bottle at the garden center stays right where the industry wants it on the shelf. Now you have the calcium correction. The garden books quietly stopped printing after 1962, and you have it for about 4 cents a serving. If you want the full system that bed sits inside, the small raised bed and vertical container setup that produced the 47 pounds in the first place, that's Chapter 7 of the 30-day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol. It's called Scaling Up, from windowsill to backyard, and it includes 2 line art diagrams, the vertical growing setup I run along the south fence, and the succession planting timeline that keeps a small bed in production for 9 months out of the year. $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. If you're watching this on your TV, go ahead and grab your phone and point the camera at the QR code on the screen. If you're already on your phone or your laptop, the link is right there in the description. Take a second and pull it up. No rush, I'll wait right here. It's the guide I wish I'd had 10 years ago when I was killing tomato plants in my Portland apartment. So that's the whole thing. 1 cup of powdered milk, 1 gallon of room temperature water, 3 times a season, 4 cents a serving, and a doubled pepper harvest. Now you have the same correction Gloria's grandmother was using on her chili pots in Taiwan 60 years ago, the same one that quietly disappeared from American extension pamphlets sometime in the 1960s. And while we're on the subject of pantry amendments that got walked out of the literature, there's another one I'm working on a video about right now. A wood ash and lime trick for tomatoes that the calcium spray industry buried for the same reason they buried this one. That one is coming soon, so keep an eye out. Here's what I'd ask you to do this week. Try 1 cup on 1 pepper plant, just 1. Leave the others alone, mark the date on your calendar, and watch what happens by the next flush of flowers. You'll see what I mean. Tell me in the comments which peppers you're growing. I read them all. Until next time, keep growing your own food, my friend.